Welcome to the Gone Fission podcast, your one-stop source for news about the emerging nuclear renaissance and environmental cleanup of Department of Energy sites across the nation. Now, here's your host, Michael Butler.
Hello, and welcome to the Gone Fission podcast. Today is Monday, February 9th, 2026. If you haven't subscribed to the Gone Fission podcast, I invite you to do that now, so you don't miss any future episodes. The year was 2017. It was a shocking event that seemed to come out of nowhere. One day, one of America's newest nuclear power plants was under construction. Concrete was being poured, welders were working behind hot torches, food trucks were serving lunch to hundreds of workers. The site was buzzing with activity, a major power plant headed toward completion, joining America's impressive nuclear fleet. Then suddenly everything came to a halt. The site was closed and barricaded. Workers were sent home. Heavy equipment sat quiet and dormant. And then the weeds began to grow. It's been called one of the biggest construction failures in American history. The aftermath reached from Wall Street to federal courtrooms. C-suite executives resigned in disgrace. Some went to prison. Large, well-known corporations filed bankruptcy. And ratepayers were left holding the bag as a $9 billion investment circled the drain. Yes, I'm talking about the Virgil Summer Nuclear Power Station in Jenkinsville, South Carolina. Located in Fairfield County, about 20 miles from the state capital in Columbia, VC Summer was a project of two of the state's utilities, South Carolina Electric and Gas and Santee Cooper. Unit 1 at Summer had operated reliably since 1982. The plant was expanding with the addition of Units 2 and 3. The utilities were in the process of constructing two new AP1000 reactors on the site. They had been scheduled to go into service in 2020, but due to cost overruns, which forced the construction contractor Westinghouse into bankruptcy in what was referred to as the Nukegate scandal, construction of these new units was abandoned in 2017. Now the failed plant has a new lease on life as Santee Cooper and its new financial partner, Brookfield, a Canadian private equity firm, want to bring construction of two units roaring back. What caused the construction halt at VC Summer? Can it be resurrected and brought to life 9 years later? We'll discuss that today with our guest, Jim Little, a member of the South Carolina Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council and a longtime industry veteran. All that will be coming up in just a few minutes. But first, here's Mike Dean, the Nuclear Average Joe, with this week's thoughts on nuclear. What's up, Mike?
What's up there, nukes? Today I'd like to talk about SMRs, advanced nuclear. There's so much more I can talk about, but I gotta really time conserve here. But we are full steam ahead. July 4th of 2026 is a crucial date for the entire SMR market. Why is that? That's because if you go back to last year, there was an executive order and in layman's terms, basically a contest and who is going to get their reactor, their SMR or MMR, to criticality, basically turning that sucker on by July 4th. The race is on. I mean, there are going to be some losers. There always is, but there's certainly going to be some winners. Not going to dive into that because I have a hunch, but given the nature of my business, I'd rather not disclose that. But I want to talk about maybe the elephant in the room, at least for the nukes and the industry itself, and a little bit of pessimism around it. Rather challenges. challenges that we can certainly overcome. And I think the biggest challenge, it's not cost. So don't let anyone tell you that. These tech companies are willing to give all the money in the world to see these things happen. Not to mention the US government, but I digress. The biggest challenge is fuel. And it's not, hey, where's the uranium coming from? It is the enrichment. It's basically the process you have to go through to get the uranium from just an ore, a rock, to enriched fuel. But not just any nuclear fuel, not LEU, which is low enriched uranium. We're talking HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium. What is that? Basically, it's enrichment up to close to 20%. I believe it's 19.75. It costs a lot of money to do so. We have to tighten the supply chain for the cost. We're doing it. It's going to happen. Stay tuned for another one. Peace.
Well, our guest now is Jim Little. Jim has a long and an illustrious career in the nuclear industry. His resume is really too long to cover in this podcast, but suffice it to say that he is a nuclear industry veteran and is a long-serving member of the South Carolina Governor's Nuclear Advisory Committee and a leader in a number of industry organizations. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Mike.
Well, thank you. We're happy to have you today. Let's just jump right in with some of the discussion that we want to have on the VC Summer plant. What do you think are some of the main factors that led to the halt of construction of the Summer plant in 2017? What happened that led up to this, what's now considered, at least for the moment, a failure in the construction history of the nuclear industry?
Well, I think there's a natural piece where it was a first of a kind project here. You didn't have the existing supply chain and labor force and that sort of thing, and they're ready for, early in my career, we were building lots of nuclear plants, and then there was about a 30-year lull. So obviously you had that. I think that was important, and there were a number of factors that had to be overcome. But I think the real thing is that I think there was a lack of understanding about really where the risks were and where they were going to be. It was all the best intentions. We're going to put our best foot forward and try and make this thing happen. But I think it was really a reliance on old kinds of processes and procedures, construction contracts, and that were maybe appropriate, 30 or 40 years ago, but in this new environment, they're not. With a fragmented supply chain, when I started over 50 years ago, you had big industrial conglomerates in nuclear. You had Westinghouse and you had GE. And we made everything. The pumps, the motors, the valves, the electronics, the switchgear. We did everything. Well, those conglomerates no longer exist. So now we rely on a supply chain. Mm-hmm. And I think also, number two was the fact that the people that were doing this now were not from my generation, but the generation after me. They had never really built anything. And I think that the last thing I'd say is the lack of a real good kind of EPC element in this, where the constructability was put forward into this design. The AP1000 is a very novel design, but it needed to be engineered. And there was a lack of engineering of that design going forward. It was a modular plant, okay, in a sense, not stick built, but stick engineered. Okay, mm-hmm. So I think that's really the primary three factors in that.
Well, it's been about 9 years since construction stopped on this project. Why is there interest in restarting construction now? What's driving that interest?
Well, I think a few years ago, I think people suddenly realized it wasn't about the cost of energy, but energy security. About 5 years ago, we had that event in Texas. We almost lost the grid in Texas. And it was this, wait a minute. And we've seen in global conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, those kind of things, that made energy security really very, very important. And the reliance on a single source of energy generation produces some vulnerabilities. The interruption of natural gas, or demand for natural gas, shifted over to Europe with the removal of Russian natural gas in that kind of process. The other thing on top of that is for, many years, the growth in electrical demand was low, 1.5% per year. And we're really, in a sense, replacing obsolete plants or replacing more costly kinds of operations. For example, in coal facilities have been in decline for years, probably not for pollution things, but for the cost. Natural gas was cheaper. So all of a sudden we have this increase in demand funded by AI and the insourcing of businesses that were globally done. Let's bring these advanced manufacturing back to the United States. Let's do this. So I think that suddenly prompted an increase in demand. So that would be the market conditions, but the actual condition of Virgil Summer was very unique. We had this plant literally stop construction. And it was the suggestion of Tom Davis, state senator from South Carolina, saying, "Hey, you ever go back and look at this?" And that's what myself and Rick Lee, who's the chairman of the Nuclear Advisory Council, said, "Hey, we're going to go look." And we were surprised by what we found, shocked at what we found, the state of that plant.
What did you find?
We found out a plant that had looked like construction had stopped 6 months ago, not 8 years ago. Number one. Number two, we found that all the components were actually already at the site. 14 warehouses, 26 acres of controlled environment storage, pumps still in bubble wrap. I even saw the control room CRTs delivered in boxes. I mean, literally there for a plant that unit one was about, 48% complete, unit two in the low 20% complete. It was like time had stood still. So it created the opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, this is a technologically feasible to finish. And you're going to get 2,300 megawatts of a high availability resource for the state of South Carolina that could run for up to 80 years. Now you compare that with the interest in small modular reactors. This project is the equivalent of 8 SMRs. 8. And you could do it in short term. There's 2 running in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute.
Right.
So was this concept from when I drafted the report and issued it, all of a sudden there was this interest. And the state of South Carolina could get its equity back. $9 billion on the rate base sitting there as a cost. Get someone to come in and finish this thing, that loss becomes equity for the state. It's a perfect storm.
Well, the way you describe it almost sounds like an IKEA store where you've got all the parts and pieces there, but it just needs to be put together.
Well, it's not that easy. Okay, it's a great idea, but it has to be done very, very carefully, very carefully. That times have changed, so you've got to go and requalify, make sure all the records are in place, the equipment's suitable, and those kind of things. I'll call that the engineering tasks. But now you've got to reinstitute a license. You've got to get private equity to come in with money, and they have to say and do a due diligence thing about what this is. You may have purchase power agreements, which don't exist in the state. It's a regulated electrical system here in the state. That would be novel. You've got to deal with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission saying, hey, how do you reinstitute a license? Okay. How can we not repeat the problems of the past that were not only exhibited at Virgil Summer, but Vogtle? Vogtle, great hindsight, but hindsight is not foresight. And this is a new environment. I've got to find supply chain to redo this stuff. Are the components still under warranty from the sub-suppliers? Okay. I need to get the qualified skilled labor back. There were 4,500 people on that day when the project was shut down working at the site that day. We got to go get them. Are there demands on those people in other industries? We got to requalify those. It's a very complicated task, but if done correctly, it could be a gateway to replicating additional AP1000s in the state and in this region. For example, the AP1000s, there were about 10 people back 20 years ago that were saying, I think I want one of these. And they're watching Virgil Summer and Vogtle, and they backed off. Duke has the lease site, AP1000, right? So if they were to participate in this, you could form a family replication of a fleet of AP1000s here. That would be great. That significantly reduces the risk of replication, right? Number one, a fleet model. And you look at that, it also fills a gap because for Westinghouse, the next plants are going to maybe be built in Poland or another country, maybe 5 to 7 years from now? How are you going to keep your workforce engaged and current and your talent still rejuvenated? No one's going to hold their breath for 7 years, right? So this is a beautiful situation for that. And it also makes the United States show that it can deliver these things on time and within budget.
Well, let's talk about where things stand now relative
Yeah.
to construction.
Mhm.
Of course, South Carolina Electric and Gas, SCANA, is out of business.
Right.
Dominion has dropped out of the picture as far as
Right.
VC Summer is concerned.
Right.
So, talk about the role of Santee Cooper and their pending agreement with Brookfield Asset Management for
Okay.
financing this plant.
All right. So when the project fell apart and SEG went away in Dominion, Santee Cooper took title to everything. They were about a 42% owner of it up to that point. They took title to everything. So they have all this equipment, okay? And along comes this idea that we propose, let's finish this, get private equity to finish that money. So they started this process to let bidders come in. And there were three bidders, Oppenheimer, Elemental, and the nuclear company, and they were all going to bid this. And Brookfield Asset Management up there in Canada, the owner of Westinghouse, by the way, and a very big private equity firm, came in and said, we're going to do this. And they put $2.7 billion on the table and said, we're going to do our due diligence. This is important. Okay. And that was a breath of fresh air, quite frankly. They have the scale, they have the control of Westinghouse this time. Okay. To do that, they can bring the right governance in play. And so Santee Cooper framed an agreement with Brookfield to enter into this period I'll call due diligence, this 12 to 18 month of running through and checking and making sure everything, what would it take before they reach what we call an FID, a financial investment decision to proceed.
I used the word failure earlier in talking about VC Summer. Do you consider what happened there with the halting of construction to be a failure? And why is it important to the nuclear industry for this plant to be finished?
I think the Virgil Summer situation, if you look at it, its failure, its impact, in the end, it was a good thing because it was a wake-up call. We've got to change the way in which we approach these mega projects. We've got to change them. This isn't the only mega project that's failed. The big dig in Washington. Wait, what is the difference? And if we solve how to replicate these mega projects, even outside nuclear, even in some of the larger fossil kinds of things, even infrastructure kinds of things, if we have a new way of doing these things, that would be fantastic. So to me, I like to take a problem like that and turn it upside down and say, it's really an opportunity. Now everybody's recognized, wait a minute, we can't do things this way. We can't write a contract like a lump sum contract. There was a CEO of a utility who I met with 21 years ago for dinner. And he said, we're going to buy an AP1000. And I said, oh, that's a good design, interesting design. Not engineered yet. Okay. He said, well, we're going to protect ourselves with a lump sum contract, and that will manage risk. And I said, no, that won't manage risk. Okay. Contracts don't fix problems, they fix blame. Okay. You isolating yourself and lump summing it is basically saying, look, that's any problem is theirs, but it's still your problem. You still need that plant. It also isolates you from them so you don't have that interaction. You don't have the oversight. You don't have that governance. And that's exactly what's happened on both these, the Vogel project and here. So to me, Virgil Summer failing, it's over. Okay, it's got an impact, but has this tremendous opportunity to say, oh, we have to change now. So no one is saying, oh, we can do this the old way. And if you look at successful mega projects, the London Heathrow Terminal 5, on time in an operating airport, huge project. Matter of fact, they changed the size of the planes halfway through the design. Okay. The London 2012 Olympics, on time and on budget. Even more so, 4 units in the UAE, Barakah by the Koreans, in a country with no nuclear, a cultural, language gap, on time and on budget. Hey, what was the answer? They had a one project mentality. They analyzed risk, they forecasted risk, and they put everybody in the same risk pool. Your risk is my risk. And said, well, there's no attempt to try and transfer risk, which we know you can't do and doesn't work. So to me, Virgil Summer, in a way, is a blessing.
Well, with the agreement between Santee Cooper and Brookfield, are you optimistic that the current plan will work, that the two units can be successfully completed?
I think it can happen. I really do. Am I 100% sure? It depends on what those companies are going to decide. I'm not on the board of directors of those companies. I don't have the insight. To them, look, let's face it, it is a risk, okay? But it's also an investment. Is the return worth the risk profile? There will be challenges. I guarantee you there will be challenges, okay? It's how you manage them as opposed to avoid them. There's a big problem in industry today of risk aversion. Everybody's playing not to lose. The contracts that do this and boards of directors are moving away from the long range plan to shareholder value in this quarter report. And how might it look if this thing fails? And requiring their internal organizations to come up and say, give me a price which will never exceed for this project. Well, that's not reality. There are bans and opportunities, those kinds of things. So let's let's be a student of risk. Let's think bad thoughts to get good answers. Think about what might happen, analyze the probability. The nuclear industry advanced the use of probabilistic risk assessment back in the early 80s. That was one of the ones that worked on it. And what did we find out? Well, it wasn't the reactor that was a generator of risk. It was out in the balance of plant, or it was the operator. The reliance on an operator to make decisions in a control full of thousands of indications not designed for that function for this more likely event that cascaded. That's what happens in projects. So we worried about core meltdown. Do we worry about project meltdown? Do you ever analyze what the drivers to that were? And look at this design over my shoulder. The result of that design and why it's much safer was looking at those probabilistic risk assessments and saying, wow, I can improve safety by moving the refueling water storage tank inside containment and not relying on switchover during a loss of coolant accident. I can rely on passive cooling and I don't worry about diesel generators and pumps. Okay, well, that same thinking, that same mentality can be applied to projects. Are they event trees? Do they have consequences? Do they have probabilities? They do. So a project is just like a nuclear plant.
Hmm.
So let's use that mentality and get some insights. Understand risk, the shape of risk, so you can navigate.
Right. The Brookfield coming in to VC Summer has set a little bit of a precedent here in terms of the role of private investment.
Mhm.
Do you see the private investment being more of a factor in the construction of future nuclear plants?
The new customer is not the utility, it's the user. Google. Well, I mean, look what's happening at 3 Mile Island. Okay, let's keep that thing running. Palisades. The new users, the new clients are the users, and they have money. So it's not the utility that's working in a regulated environment with a public utility commission and ratepayers and all that kind of stuff. It's saying private equity. They have the money, they have the insight, and you're not looking for public opinion, but for the right decision. So the new clients are the users.
Mhm.
Big shift after what, 100 years in the United States of centralized electrical generation, the socioeconomic model of I will give the public reliable, safe power without rate shock, and I will get in turn for that recover my cost plus a guaranteed rate of return of 11 to 12%. It's like a municipal bond. Okay, that's really great. Dividend checks in the mail. I'm retiree. You get those dividend checks. Oh, this is great.
Mhm.
And you don't care so much about the price of the stock of the utility as the fact that that dividend check shows up. Well, times have changed. Times have changed. And these users need reliable, highly available power, okay, that's resilient. It's not prone to, hurricane shocks in the price of natural gas or the licensing of a natural gas pipeline about thousands of miles. The Atlantic Coast pipeline was canceled. Why? It's very difficult to permit. Nuclear plants don't need pipelines.
Well, in your role with the Governor's Nuclear Council and
Mhm.
your general
Yeah.
participation in the industry, um, you appreciate the fact that South Carolina is recognized as a leader in
Oh, yeah.
nuclear energy, nuclear development. In fact, the American Nuclear Society had a poll or survey recently that showed
Yeah.
South Carolina in the top 10 in the country
Yeah.
for nuclear development. What's happening with VC Summer? What does that say about South Carolina's leadership
Okay. All right.
in nuclear
So
energy?
here's what we were, uh, what I was doing. Uh, I was the co-chairman of the Southeast Nuclear Advisory Council, separate from South Carolina, and we decided to do an economic study of the nuclear industry across the 5-state southeastern region, what we call the Fertile Crescent of nuclear, my term, right? Virginia, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. Okay. And it was funded by the U.S. Department of Commerce. And what we found out is this, that the economic output of the nuclear industry in those states is $43 billion a year. The tax revenue from that output is 3.7 billion a year. The average wage in that industry in those 5 states is $89,000 a year. South Carolina came out ranked number one of those 5 states. $11 billion a year in economic output, 1.1 billion in tax revenues, 43,000 employees. Whoa. So right now, South Carolina is number one. And what we told the state and the governor, we're number one, but if we stand here and we don't do anything, we won't be number one. Look what's happening in Virginia. Huge state investment, legislative funding for that. Tennessee, wow, huge, huge. Oak Ridge, boom. Texas. So, yes, we're ahead in the race, okay? But we're walking and they're running. And if we don't act, we lose our place.
Mhm.
And we have a very unique situation of the only large scale nuclear power plant opportunity in the near term future. The others are all small modular reactors. This is the big one, 2,300 megawatts of an 80-year asset. And the governor listened. And the governor listened.
Do
And the state
you,
is now, and it's bipartisan. You want to think about in today's political situation, there's bipartisan political support for nuclear, Democrat and Republican.
Mhm.
It's not an issue. And it's economic development, and it's jobs, and it's tax revenues for state programs. There's not a real downside here. But the upside is you've got to get over this cliff. You got to be able to show that you can deliver it.
Mhm. In your crystal ball, beyond VC Summer, do you see other nuclear plants being built in South Carolina?
I would say yes. Back in 2004, Brew Barron was at Duke Energy, and he was the chief nuclear officer. This is when the AP 1000 was being first discussed. So this is quite a while ago, 22 years ago. And he came up with the concept of the Advanced Plant Owners Group, a legal entity of AP 1000, subscribers that would collectively act together to, in a sense, create a fleet model of replicated designs where the risk goes down as the number goes from first of a kind to next of a kind to next of a kind, each one successively, ensuring that information operators, simulators, training program, fuel purchases. This has been done before. It was done in France in the 1980s. I worked on it. France faced the OPEC oil crisis and said, we're going to go nuclear. And they came to Westinghouse and said, we want the Westinghouse 3-loop pressurized water reactor. And they replicated. They're all identical. France is 80% nuclear today because they made that fleet decision. Now, they could because they had one utility, EDF. It was a national policy. So we don't have the same political structure as France. But if we can do this in this private equity model, the potential's there. Look at the lease site. Okay. It's ready to go. Now, Duke put an early site permit for Bellows Creek for an SMR, but they still have the lease site. And if you read their recent integrated resource plan they submitted, it still lists the lease site as an opportunity. Are they saying anything public? No, not yet. But I know internally they've got to be chatting.
Well, Jim, in closing, I want to give you the opportunity to share any thoughts you have that we haven't talked about with our viewers and listeners. Anything else that you'd like for folks to know about what's happening in South Carolina or about the VC Summer Plant or about nuclear in general?
Well, I think it's really important for the state of South Carolina to have this power source available. Look, we want the economy to grow in the state of South Carolina. If we don't do anything, we'll be about 5,000 megawatts short in about 5 years as plants go out of get retired. That's number one. If we want to attract new jobs, advanced manufacturing, even the agriculture industry, if you want to grow that, you need energy to do that. So having that growth in energy, you show that the economy is inextricably tied to the availability of energy, inextricably. And growth in that requires growth in generation. And it also generates a huge economic benefit of its own. Okay, so now's the time. If we talk about South Carolina, kind of growing up and stepping up, and a lot of people are moving here, okay, to the state of South Carolina. Okay, this enables that. It attracts new people. And if you're a family person, okay, and your children are here, you'd love for them to stay. You would love for them to stay local and not go off to, Google land someplace or California. Gee, I'd love to have, my kids living near me and growing up in the educational institutions like the University of South Carolina and Clemson and South Carolina State. Wait a minute, there's tremendous opportunity here. And so it all is a system. It's an economic system, and energy is a really important part of it. Okay.
Well, Jim Little, longtime nuclear industry veteran and member of the Governor's Nuclear Advisory Council, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's always a challenge, and it's a subject I love talking about.